just some Sundays, we're lucky enough to have Glenn come and share his beautiful voice with us. I just
want to know who the third retired serendipity person is, though. I know me and Jan. Who's the third one?
Oh, I guess she's not here today. Is it me? No, that's Annie we're talking.
Oh, okay.
You guys can figure it out.
Annie, obviously it's me.
Oh, yeah. I know. Let's say the serendipity third. Oh, yeah.
I was a member briefly.
Okay.
Okay, there you go. That's the
I'm
third
number
person.
3.
Okay.
Okay, good. But anytime I talk about my singing ability, there's always a chuckle that comes around. Because I am so tone deaf that it's ridiculous.
Tone deaf minister with a musical ministry.
Oh, yes, I am a tone deaf minister with a musical ministry. Talk about, setting yourself up. But it's wonderful because, and I even noticed Margaret is here today too.
Yeah.
Yes.
A musician, that's so great. I want to talk about ghosts. Isn't that fun? Because how many of you ever think you feel, see, or hear a spirit of someone who's passed? You all should have at some time felt something that you couldn't reconcile it with what you knew. Well, you're not crazy, because those beings on the other side quite often come and visit us. And right now, with the full moon, with the changing of the seasons, and with the veil being the thinnest, this is when it's the easiest to get in touch. Now, why do we celebrate this time of year?
This is Halloween.
No, why else? Because our wonderful Reverend Ayleen Augustine, who I was concerned got maybe something happened to her this morning, is going to tell us a little bit about the foundation, going all the way back to the Druidic and Celtic times.
Yay! Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
This is actually a very special time for Druids and the ancient Celts because actually our year begins and ends at Samhain. It is viewed as, the idea was that there were really only two seasons. There was summer and there was winter. The beginning and the end. So the idea that at this time, it's the time of the final harvest. It's the time that anything that you've been working on through the year is complete. Whether you like how it completed is up to you, but it is complete. And there was a sense of the idea that it's enough. It's enough for this year. You've done enough. And it was also at this time that things were shared. So the idea of giving and providing for other people in your community was one of the foundations of the idea of trick or treat and Halloween, as were the children who would go from house to house looking for those last little bits of the goodies that were left from the end of the harvest. You see, the Celtic cultures were very, very clan-based. They were very, very much focused on community. If someone had had a bad year, then it was shared. Once each person, each family figured out what they needed to make it through the winter, whatever was left was shared. It was shared with maybe the widow who didn't have, the help of, the strong guys to be able to help with the harvest. Or maybe there had been a war and, there weren't as, many people growing things through the year. Or maybe it had been a very hard year in nature. Maybe there was more rain and things didn't go as well. But the whole idea was that it was to be shared. And it is a very special time when it comes to the idea of the spirits. There are actually a couple of times of year in the Celtic tradition where the veil thins. And it's actually under what's considered to be the most auspicious Samhain is one under a new moon. Because the idea is that when the physical vision is obscured, the spiritual vision increases. So it is in that absolute darkness that we see the most. And ghosts aren't considered dead. In fact, they're referred to as living spirits. And they come and they help. And they assist and they guide and they're remembered because they would like to be remembered. one of the pillars of Druidry is honoring of ancestors. That all those who came before are still here, they're still a part of us, because spirit is eternal. And they have a concept called Puergan, which is the circuit of births. So there's a strong belief that ancestors come back into this life. The realm of the dead is referred to as Tierra Nanang, which is the living world. This is considered the human world. But the living world is where we go, and there's no cold, and there's no hunger, and there is feasting, and there are battles where no one gets hurt. And the idea that we spend time there, but then we return here in order to learn, in order to help the balance of the universe. Because everything that you learn in their tradition throughout life, that when you pass, there is nothing but wisdom. There are no regrets. There's no shame. There's no blame. And everything you ever experience becomes a gift to the universe. And it is given to the great world tree. And by what you give, by your experiences, every success, every failure, the entire universe is made smarter and more compassionate, which means that everything you go through matters. Everything you go through makes all of us more human for generations to come. Now, they also have a different, it's not like the ofrenda, but there are altars that are set up honoring those who have passed. There are visits to the burial places. They have barrows often, and so you would go to the barrow, and they would have what was called the dumb supper, which was when you would set up a supper and no one would speak. And a plate was set at the beginning of the table, which there are many traditions that will set up a plate. And that plate is for the spirit that is meant that night to come and visit that family. And yet the entire meal is in silent contemplation, honoring that person, so that way all attention is placed on that. Then after the supper, the children will go out and dress, and they will place masks on, because it was believed that while it was a time of spirits, not all of them were so well-meaning, and that occasionally there would be a mischievous spirit that would come and try to just muck with things. So the children would dress in a way that they felt, one, would scare away any, if a spirit, a malevolent spirit showed up, that it would not recognize that they were not one of them, so they would be free to pass without a problem. And that they could go to their neighbors' houses and maybe get that extra little bit of something. And all the neighbors knew, all the adults knew that they were the children, yet there was that idea of, oh, okay, here, spirit, oh, strong spirit, you can have this or you can have that. There were no tricks, it was just treats. And the idea that it was also a time of community to appreciate the young, to appreciate the elders, because often they would have the elders would sit out, and as the young would come up, an elder, might offer a treat, but in order for the young one to get that treat, they would have to listen to a wisdom or a story. And they would pass on the stories that ultimately they would be sharing when the winter kicked in and they were all going to be stuck in a building together for a long time. They would start telling stories, and that was the way that they would pass along their traditions. So when we consider how much of a communal process that Halloween became, and in all different cultures, however people held it, the stories about their spirits that were traditional to where they were and what they did. One other thing about Samhain for the Celts was that generally they had a very orderly society. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do and everyone knew their place. Yet, in order to achieve balance, they knew there had to be times of chaos. So at this time of year, for 3 days, they called it the time of no time. And what they would do is, the men would dress as women, the women would dress as men, the cattle would be moved around to different farmers, pastures, they would take gates off, fish were thrown into rivers. But the idea was that you have this time where you get to run amok a little bit. It wasn't the purge or anything. The laws were still the laws. And yet there was silliness, there was mischief. And they would find ways to reverse things. You know, a noble would bow to a laborer, and a laborer would walk through the town as if they owned it and would be called sir or madam. So the idea that there was this sense of playfulness, this sense of chaos, very much the way that Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras, was developed prior to Lent, because they figure, okay, get it out of your system now. And it would make it a little bit easier. They also realized that very soon people were going to be enclosed together in very close quarters, and that could be very stressful. So they would allow this time for everyone to act a fool and to be silly and to kind of get some of that energy out before the doors were closed and they all had to sit around together for a very long, dark time. It also gave them a chance to interact with one another in a more casual way because, you know, as I said, the Celtic traditions were very, very orderly. And there were definitely, you know, social norms, and everyone had a chance to let go of the social norms. So, you know, and the time of no time would also, you know, probably ended up being a part of what became later Halloween parties and seasonal parties, where a bunch of adults get together, dress silly, and, you know, do whatever it is that they want to do, and it's okay. So enjoy your time of no time. Enjoy the changing of the season. Enjoy your new year. Whatever it is that didn't get done, that was on your list to do at the beginning of the year, don't worry about it. Don't worry about what you haven't accomplished, but take pride in what you have. Because honestly, there's more that you got accomplished this year than maybe you even realize. So embrace the fun, embrace the inner child, embrace the night, embrace the mystery. You know, we all have that little thing of things that go bump in the night, and taking a walk along the road and, you know, hearing the wind blow and maybe a dog howl. You know, we all go into that little fun place where we want to scare ourselves just a little bit. But the spirits are there. They're watching you, they're protecting you, they're guiding you. They love you. And as, you know, many people have had a lot of loss this year and grieving, it was also okay to grieve. It was a time of release and letting go of that grief, of whatever the nature of it was. So if you need to grieve, grieve, because this is the time for it. If you want to celebrate, celebrate, because this is the time for it. And as a Druid, I wish you a happy new year. And I wish that all of your New Year dreams come true. Thank you.